Gentlelady yields back. Chief Christensen, I usually go last, but I'm going to break that precedent today. I found a couple of things you said in your opening to be very instructive. Number one, if I heard you correctly, you're a lifelong government employee. You are new to your current role, officially about a month, unofficially less than a year. I think what struck me the most was that you yourself have experienced some of the conduct that is being discussed today. And don't want to pry, don't want to ask about anything you don't want to talk about, other than how you think your background qualifies you, your experience qualifies you to be able to address what I think everyone concedes are current and previous problems with Forest Service.
Thank you, Congressman. I don't want to, everyone's experience is their own experience, so I don't want to say I know how people feel, but I know I have an experience, and I know what commitment that brings for me. There's a long legacy of great conservation work, and there are great women, people of color, of all races that contribute to that work, and they absolutely have to have the right, safe place to contribute that work. That's what gives me my fuel and my commitment, is from my experience. We have come a long way. It's shame on us if we don't move the needle on how women and minorities are treated. It is our time to permanently upend the long-rooted behaviors and norms, and that's what I'm committed to do because I have an experience. And I'll just say one other very personal thing. 10 days after I became interim chief, I became a grandmother for the first time to a little girl. And I am doing this for all little girls. It's about the future, and I am committed.
Chief, I think sending a clear, unmistakable message that what had been tolerated in the past will no longer be tolerated is vital. But if I were the victim of either past or current harassment, I would be even more interested in the actions that are being taken. What have you done since you started, unofficially and or officially, to ameliorate this problem?
We've added additional capacity because the reporting harassment call center has gone up. We think that's an indication that folks are starting to feel a little more comfortable about reporting. We know we have more to go, so we're working on our processes. We are we established a code of conduct for the entire agency. We broke the silence. It's just a beginning. It's not an end, and it is not a check the box on listen and learn for over 25,000 employees. And then when all the seasonals came on, 6 weeks later, we did a stand-up for everyone where they received absolutely clear anti-harassment training, code of conducts, and anchored to the values of this agency of this is who we are. We've opened up and started with sincerity the Office of Work Environment and Performance. The EEOC has named that as an agency, as a standard for government and private industry. We are introducing bystander intervention training and coaching. We are in the throes of finalizing retaliation prevention training and conduct, and this victim advocacy and support infrastructure. And finally, we are conducting an agency-wide assessment because we need, the listen and learns only opened up part of the dialogue. We need to know what's really going on in the culture, and we need to set a baseline so we can measure ourselves on how we're improving. We have many other steps in mind for the future, but those are the things that are actively putting in place now.
Inspector General Fong, in the time I have remaining, I applaud anyone who thinks that you should have professional investigators, particularly given this unique crime. Victim advocates, fantastic. trying to think of the best way to say this in a legal way. How in the hell can you have the perpetrator in the room with the victim? How does that happen, and what steps can be taken to make sure that doesn't happen? I can't think of anything that has a more chilling effect on someone being able to tell their story than to have the perpetrator present. So for those of us who can't fathom how that happens, how does it happen, and what steps can be taken to make sure it doesn't happen again?
I understand your concern, and what I would say is that we want to send a very clear message in our office that if people have concerns or issues that they would like to bring forward, that we have multiple ways and multiple avenues where we can help people. We have a hotline, as you know. We have a special investigations office that we've set up to address these kinds of things. We also house the whistleblower coordinator for the department, who is available to talk to employees about different options that may be available to them to address their situation in the moment. And I think that's a very important message to get out to everyone.
Oversight and government reform will come to order. Without objection, the presiding member is authorized to declare recess at any time. We welcome you, Admiral. We have votes that are pending, so Mr. Cummings and I are going to try to get our opening statements in, and then we'll recognize you for yours, time allowing, and then we'll come back after votes. But welcome. The Transportation Security Administration is charged with an important mission, which is safeguarding the America's aviation system. TSA screens over 2 million passengers daily at over 430 airports. There is no margin for error, so consequently, their mission requires constant vigilance in an ever-evolving threat environment. To meet this demanding responsibility, TSA must run efficiently and effectively. It must directly address security threats. It must encourage open dialogue. It must foster a culture of leadership. And while Congress recognizes TSA is under relatively new leadership, and while we also acknowledge and recognize that doing your job effectively is not always, in the current environment, noteworthy. Those two facts notwithstanding, TSA in some instances has fallen short of the important mission that they have been afforded. In 2015, the committee received allegations of senior-level misconduct and whistleblower retaliation, and consequently launched an investigation. During the course of the investigation, the committee conducted 11 transcribed interviews, met and spoke with dozens of whistleblowers, and reviewed thousands of pages of documents. The committee held 5 public hearings, including today's. Yesterday, the committee released its investigative report and the result of findings. As detailed in the report, the committee's investigation discovered senior TSA officials engaged in patterns of misconduct, resulting in very minimal consequences. In December of 2014, TSA's Office of Inspection launched an investigation into Assistant Administrator Joseph Salvador. The complaint alleged Mr. Salvador committed misconduct by having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, misusing his official position during the hiring process, and lacking candor with investigators. Through its investigation, the Office of Inspection determined Salvador committed several acts of misconduct and recommended that he be fired. Despite the recommendation, TSA leadership chose not to terminate Salvador. In the same hour Salvador received OPR's notice of proposed removal, the Chief Counsel's office offered a settlement agreement, recommending, instead of dismissal, a 14-day suspension and a demotion with no loss in pay. Not surprisingly, Salvador accepted. The Department's Office of Inspector General discovered the same pattern. In their report, the OIG concluded TSA senior leaders deviated from standard policy and practice in a number of key respects, indicating that the Assistant Administrator received unusually favorable treatment in the resolution of his disciplinary matter. The committee also found senior TSA officials used involuntary directed reassignments as a means of retaliating against disfavored employees, including whistleblowers. Initially directed reassignments, which relocate employees from airport to airport, were intended to improve the workforce and thereby security at airports. Senior officials at TSA headquarters, however, soon used them as a tool of reprisal to force whistleblowers or disfavored employees to relocate airports, often 100 miles away, and in some instances, several states away. In May of 2018, the Office of Special Counsel settled a set of these retaliation cases with TSA for $1 million. In this case, 3 TSA employees who raised operational issues at Honolulu Airport were relocated from Hawaii, where their homes and families lived, to mainland U.S. They were forced to report to their new assignment within just a few days. In a recent briefing, the committee learned TSA is considering implementing another initiative using directed reassignments to improve the TSA workforce. If that is indeed the case, TSA needs to reconsider. The last time TSA used directed reassignments, it became a tool to retaliate. And that is one of the reasons we're having the hearing today, to ensure mistakes of the past are not repeated. Throughout our investigation, the committee also faced obstruction which prolonged this investigation. And I'm just going to stop right now and repeat what I said earlier on. I recognize TSA is under new leadership, and most of what I am describing, if not all of what I am describing, did not take place under the Admiral's watch. Nonetheless, it was TSA then, too. And per our normal investigative practice, the committee requested documents from TSA. TSA refused to produce many of these documents. The committee then issued a subpoena to compel production of the documents, but under direction of the Department's Office of General Counsel, TSA refused to produce these documents. In January of 2018, we sent a letter to Secretary Nielsen requesting a transcribed interview with then DHS Acting General Counsel Maher and demanded the production of the subpoena documents. DHS and TSA refused to comply with either request. Finally, after the committee issued a subpoena 2 weeks ago, Mr. Maher agreed to appear before a transcribed interview. TSA, however, has yet to produce the documents. That is, to put it plainly, not going to be tolerated. As a result, our findings will be shared with leadership in the House and those responsible for appropriating money to the TSA. The documents requested relate to the underlying allegations in this investigation, which are misconduct and retaliation, and yet the Office of General Counsel withheld them on the basis of a thinly veiled, almost exclusively self-serving privilege that, oh, by the way, is also inapplicable to congressional investigations. The House of Representatives derives its authority from the U.S. Constitution and is bound only by the privileges derived therefrom. This committee does not, nor does the House of Representatives, recognize purported non-disclosure privileges associated with common law. That is true even when said privileges are relevant. That was not the case here. Here, TSA sought to rely on inapplicable privileges which are, in addition to not being recognized by Congress, inapplicable. It appears, at least to this member, TSA sought to withhold this information through DHS General Counsel from Congress because TSA simply believed it could. It is the responsibility of the House, and that includes all members, irrespective of political ideation, to thwart such intransigence. TSA needs to produce these documents to the committee in full. The problems laid out in the committee's report are not simply issues of the past. TSA officials involved in wrongdoing, in some instances, remain in senior positions today. A number of OSC whistleblower cases have yet to be resolved. TSA and DHS OGC continue to refuse to produce compelled documents and material facts to the committee. TSA must continue to improve its leadership accountability and its culture. As one whistleblower testified, TSA's problems are rooted in the areas of leadership and culture. Ours is a culture of misconduct, retaliation, lack of trust, cover-ups, and the refusal to hold its senior leaders accountable for poor judgment and malfeasance. And for the safety of our nation, TSA must do better. And I will say, based on my interactions with you, Admiral, I am confident that you're going to be able to provide the kind of leadership if you are given enough time to do so, which we'll get to that during the Q&A part, the term of service. Further to that, before I recognize Mr. Cummings, I'm not going to ask you any trick questions. I'm going to go last. I'm going to ask you about the budget. I'm going to ask you about equipment at the screening points. I'm going to ask you, to the extent you can discuss it publicly, about new emerging threats. I'm going to ask you about air marshals. I'm going to ask you about your budget and whether or not you could use more research sources. So I'm not going to try to trick you when it's my time to ask questions. I think that you are the right person to provide leadership, but I know that new leadership is needed. And what happened yesterday, when a committee of Congress sought information related to a really important investigation, is not going to be tolerated, and I think that is true on a bipartisan. For those who like bipartisanship, stay tuned after yesterday. With that, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to